Morning, everyone. Remember yesterday when I reported about Justice Canada and their tweet? Well, we're going to revisit that today and have a look at some of the actual legal repercussions that have happened from the law changes, Bill C-45 and Bill C-46. So here we go. Sitting MP Mike Lake tweets, quote, update. Trudeau government has now deleted this tweet, but here's a screenshot. Straightforward question. Was tweet deleted because any of the information was incorrect, or were the questions it was generating just too uncomfortable? Here's the original tweet. It's summertime and the living is easy. Whether you're sitting on a patio or having a backyard #barbecue, remember it's against the law to have a blood alcohol concentration over prohibited levels within 2 hours of driving. Know the limits. Thank you, fun police. Wow. I mean, draconian, right? Like, it's like Judge Dredd arriving at the big apartment building in the Judge Dredd movie where the doctor plays Judge Dredd, right? Anyway, it's that kind of draconian society. Like, we know you've broken the law. Now we just have to prove it. Like, I don't know. It's crazy. And maybe that's a bad analogy. I watched that movie like probably a decade ago. So probably a bad analogy. Here's Maxime Bernier on the same tweet, and they deleted it. Shocking, right? And we know they deleted it, but it's insanity that they're just, yeah, we'll delete that one and move forward. I mean, I guess people do that, but man. Maxime Bernier says, quote, that tweet I retweeted from Justice Canada English about possibly being arrested in your home if you drink after driving was just erased and replaced with this confusing correction. The Justice Department isn't even sure how to interpret its own law. And here's the correction. We wanted to clarify the facts around a tweet that was issued yesterday relating to the 2-hour rule under the new alcohol impaired driving laws. These laws aim to keep our roads safer and save lives. Find out more here. And it says myth, police can use mandatory alcohol screening to come to your house 2 hours after you arrive home and demand a breath sample. Fact, mandatory alcohol screening to be used, for mandatory alcohol screening to be used, the car must be lawfully stopped. You as the driver must be in care and control of the vehicle. The police officer must have the device at hand. And interesting that that's not true. And I'll show you cases already that have been already thrown out because people's rights have been violated, right? Here's the Post-Millennial first saying, Trudeau's government impaired driving law is so unclear, even the Justice Department can't explain it. And this is about the same tweets. Here we go. Earlier today, the official Twitter account for the Department of Justice had to issue a clarification after Maxime Bernier, the leader of the People's Party of Canada, called the organization out for posting a worrying public announcement in both English and French. In their original announcement, the Justice Canada account clearly stated that you could be arrested if you were to enjoy a drink after driving. The statement seemed to include summertime drinking on your own patio, noting that, quote, it's summertime and the living is easy, and I already read it already, so I'm not going to read it again. The clarification posted since then pointed to a section in the law that prohibits conviction for those who decide to drink after arriving home safely. And these laws aim to protect it, right? I'd laugh at the awkward tweets if the actual law and potential repercussions weren't so damn serious. While Justice Canada has issued a clarification, their mistake only highlights the tip of the iceberg when it comes to problems with the recent legal changes brought forward through the adoption of Bill C-46 and its cousin C-45. And I scroll down, it just gives a little bit of a history of the laws, etc. According to several lawyers interviewed by the CBC, not only can the police now come to your house up to 2 hours after you stop driving or boating to test your sobriety, the charge is considered a reverse onus. That means if the police charge you, it is on you to prove that your blood alcohol level was not over the limit at the time of driving or boating. And if you decide to reject the breath test, well, you'll be charged on the spot. Take that in for a moment. The Trudeau Liberals appear to have put forward a law so confusing and so poorly made that even the Department of Justice has difficulty explaining it. When it comes to enforcement, ordinary citizens will have to prove their innocence in the face of a disastrously written law. Worse yet, citizens with the least access to legal or financial aid will have to face criminal charges that they are then responsible for proving they are not guilty of, instead of the other way around. A large swath of civil liberty groups and radicalized communities have already slammed have slammed the move for putting far too many powers in the hands of police. This lack of need for and potential for danger is perhaps why senators attempted to strip the bill of its most controversial aspects before it became law. Despite this, the Trudeau government, with the help of independent senators, pushed through the bill without accepting any substantive changes. While this is all jaw-dropping, the decision to move forward with this kind of law in the face of steep opposition is even more shocking. It quickly becomes comedic when you also consider the ease and frequency with which the Liberals will brandish their pro-minority and pro-science reflexes. At some point, the government will have to decide if they actually plan to govern based on science, reason, and data, or if they instead wish to continue wasting precious political capital on PR stops, which in the long term erodes our civil liberties. Okay, and it's interesting that his instinct was the same as mine to laugh. The author's instinct was the same, right? I said it would be funny if it was happening to some, someone in a story, someone in Star Wars, some authoritarian planet, and under the boot heel of some draconian dictator who's shaping their news and who's poisoning the well of discussion, right? Like it's not funny. But what's happening here is just, you can't help but do anything but kind of go, wow, like, I can't believe that we have to go over this. I can't believe that despite history, despite the obviousness of the bad idea of socialism and communism, that we have to go down this path again, right? We have to go down this. Free speech is worth the cost, and the cost is a little bit of discomfort sometimes. It is. It's worth it. It's interesting. Here's the Justice Department's own website, and I just wanted to highlight this because, it says very clearly here, right? What is the intervening drink defense, and why was it restricted? Here's the specific part of the legislation that's speaking to what we're talking about here. It says, the intervening drink defense refers to situations where a driver consumes alcohol after driving but before providing a breath sample at the police station. This conduct is often intentional and done to interfere with the breath testing process. By changing the time frame of the offense to being at or over the offense level within 2 hours, the argument that post-consumption alcohol was the cause of the high blood alcohol concentration is no longer relevant. Recognizing that there may be situations where the post-driving consumption of alcohol was innocently done, the legislation provided a limited exception, i.e. the driver drank after driving and had no reason to expect that they would be required to provide a sample of breath. But there's a situation in just a second, I'm going to show it to you, where the person did exactly that, and they were still, they had to go to court, but it was thrown out. First, here's just an article for your reference. It's in the description. I put them here, and I'm not going to go through this one because I haven't highlighted anything, but it's a CBC article talking from January 12th of this year. Yep, January 11th this year. It says Canadians could now be charged with drunk driving, even if not drunk, lawyers warn. So just for your reference, with the changes in the laws, there's lots of changes, so I wanted to keep that there for you. But here is May 28th, 2019. Nanaimo woman wins court challenge over forced breathalyzer test hours after driving. Sounds suspiciously exactly like the Justice Canada English tweet, right? A Nanaimo woman says her rights have been violated because of a new federal drunk driving provision. Lee Laurie says she was recently at her sister's home in Maple Ridge when she received a call from the RCMP stating they had a very personal issue they needed to speak to her directly about. She assumed it was a family emergency and invited them into the home. They said there was a personal issue they needed to speak to me about. I immediately thought something had happened to a family member, Laurie said. Laurie and her boyfriend had traveled to Maple Ridge en route to pick up his children in Williams Lake. On the way to her sister's house, the group had stopped at the local pub for lunch. They each had one cocktail with them with the meal at lunch and headed home. When they arrived at home, they sat by the pool, had a few beers without any plans to leave the house that day. That's important, without any plans to leave the house that day, right? The police arrive at the home about 2 hours after they got home. Under federal government's roadside provision, police are legally allowed to request a breathalyzer without any signs of impairment. The test can be requested within 2 hours of a driver being on the road, even after someone has returned home and had alcohol to drink. Laurie failed the breathalyzer test even after explaining to the RCMP that she had been drinking for a couple of hours. The RCMP were not willing to let me prove the amount of alcohol I had consumed at home. I even invited them to see the empties, Laurie said. It was like living in a communist country with no rights. Truly, I felt violated. Laurie was issued a 90-day license suspension and a 30-day vehicle impoundment. She was also required to take a driving course. On top of that, she had to figure out how to get home to Nanaimo, and her brother's kids were stuck in Williams Lake. Laurie eventually won her court case, but she will never get back the expenses she had to pay, nor the legal fees. In total, Laurie says the ordeal cost her about $3,500 in total with lawyer expenses, travel, taxis, and vacation hours. This was devastating to my livelihood, Laurie said. I've never had a traffic violation in 25 years. It was horrible. Global News has reported extensively on the issues with the federal government's new rules. Okay, link is in the description. And there's more to this story, but that's kind of the the main bit of it. Like this is already happening, right? The tweet was fully genuine. The tweet was meant to warn you. Welcome to Canada, citizen. Have fun or else. And don't have too much fun if you've been driving, right? And I'm in no way saying that people should drink and drive or be impaired and drive. Absolutely not. But this is a bad law written with bad language and will entrap and waste police officers' time. Nowhere in this cost is the cost of police officers' time who went to the home and arrested these people and processed these people, nor the cost to the taxpayer to process this case, right? To lose, right? So there's a lot of cost to this mistake. There's a lot of cost to these bad laws that are being passed by this bad government. So, and here is another one. Now, man, I think this Canadian bank idea deserves a whole video all by itself, and maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe we'll see. But for right now, I was just introduced to this just now, I guess. And here we go. Pierre Poilievre says, tweets, corporate insiders must be licking their chops. This $35 billion government bank gives construction giants a taxpayer-funded bailout when projects go over budget. Will the $35 billion Canadian infrastructure bank survive the election? It sounds like if Mr. Scheer wins, yes. Emphatically yes. So here we go. The future of the $35 billion Canadian infrastructure bank will be decided in the October election as both the Conservatives and the New Democrats say they would shut down the Crown Corporation created by the Trudeau Liberals. The 2-year-old federal entity is now set up in Toronto's financial district with plans to increase to 74 employees and an annual operating budget of around $50 million this year. Conservative and NDP MPs told the Globe and Mail that their long-standing opposition to the bank has not changed, but both parties say any funding pledges announced by the bank would be honored should either of the two main opposition parties form government after the October 21st election. And that's why I say it doesn't look like it'll change, because not to say I didn't know about this. I remember reporting about this, but it was one of those things that's a slow boil. I was like, I've got to keep an eye on that, but there's no big blowout news, right? It's not like $223 million spent on other countries or $45 million spent on meddling in Ukraine's elections, right? It kind of sits there and grows into this big bubble. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what I mean by that, because I mean, $50 million per year's funding is not a small amount, and $35 billion is not a small amount. So I had to learn about this a little bit more. So I'm going to show you what I learned. But first, back to the article. In late May, the bank made its second funding announcement with a $2 billion pledge to provide lower-cost financing for the Metrolink's GO expansion project that would increase commuter rail frequency in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. The bank's first announcement was a $1.28 billion loan announced in the summer of 2018 toward Montreal's commuter light rail line known as the REM, which is now under construction. While the REM project is listed by the Caisse de dépôt et pension fund, the very large Quebec pension fund. The infrastructure bank has not yet delivered on the government's pledge that it would convene other large-scale pension funds and private investors to back major Canadian projects. So there's a lot more to this story as well. Here's the infrastructure bank. But first I want to point out that in May of 2019, so the infrastructure bank has been running since 2017, and it has an operating budget of $50 million, plus I'm going to get to the infrastructure bank in just a minute, but the National Post is reporting that the Auditor General can't complete audits, and the Auditor General is the body that holds Parliament accountable, right? The people that say if there's waste or if there's bad practices or whatever, this is what this body does. And so they're underfunded and they're not getting any more funding. And that's a problem, right? So here's the National Post. It says, not acceptable. Audits of federal government's performance canceled due to insufficient funding, AG tells committee. So I've got this in here. All right, I'll just read this. Outgoing Auditor General Michael Ferguson had requested $10.8 million in adding additional funds last year so his office could accommodate an expanded mandate, but with no new money on offer in 2019, the office had to drop 5 audits of government performance, including cybercrime and Arctic sovereignty. At the risk of putting words in Mr. Ferguson's mouth, I can tell you that had we received the $10.8 million that he requested last summer, our office would have considered ourselves to have been properly funded. We would have been able to do the work that was expected, said Andrew Hayes, the Deputy Auditor General. Planned spending for the current fiscal year is $93.8 million, an amount that has not risen in proportion with total government spending. And I scroll down here. This is the last bit. The 5 performance audits canceled this year were about combating cybercrime, protecting Canada's North, heritage services to Canadians, training for service delivery, and the government's travel system, said Richard. They were deemed the least important areas out of a list of planned audits, but any audit we identify is of importance, he said. Facing what we are facing, we had no choice but to reduce the level of effort and reduce the number of audits. We had no choice. We can't do it. This is the Premier Oversight Committee of Parliament, and the one thing, in my opinion, that we cannot stand, and I don't care who the government is cutting the Auditor General. That's what autocrats do when they want to deny accountability, Christopherson said, imploring Liberal members of the committee to bring the issue back to their own government. I would hope that we would begin turning the wheels necessary to undo this, because just to be political for a moment, this government already has a bit of deficiency on the democratic front. Here is yet one more knock against the professed belief and adherence to democracy and democratic values. I'm beside myself. This is not acceptable. And here's the infrastructure bank. And so there's 2 of these that I want to read you because it's interesting. It says the bank will use federal support because, as I said, I didn't know about this bank so much. I heard about it. I touched on it like once or twice, but I hadn't gotten in depth. And so I didn't know what their funding looked like. I didn't know what even they were planning on doing, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what I found out. Here we go. The bank will use federal support to attract private sector and institutional investment to new revenue-generating infrastructure projects that are in the public interest. By leveraging the capital and expertise of the private sector, the bank will help public dollars go further and keep our grant dollars for those projects that are more appropriate for traditional grant funding mechanisms. The Canadian Infrastructure Bank will invest $35 billion from the federal government into the infrastructure projects. $15 billion is sourced from over $180 billion investing in Canada Infrastructure Plan, including $5 billion for public transit systems, $5 billion for trade and transportation corridors, and $5 billion for green infrastructure projects, including those that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, deliver clean air and safe water systems, and promote renewable energy. And here's the Statement of Priorities and Accountability, Canadian Infrastructure Bank. And this is a letter from the MP to, I think, the first chairperson of the bank. And they said, under the Act, Parliament has approved providing the bank with $35 billion over the next 11 years as needed, and the authority to participate in complex infrastructure deals in new and innovative ways using loans, loan guarantees, and equity investments. The bank is expected to prudently manage its portfolios such that the total net fiscal expense over this period will remain under $15 billion. You will find in Annex A the government's priorities for the bank investments, as well as criteria that the bank is expected to follow when making its investments, in addition to other investments criteria that the bank determines appropriate. I scroll down. As with other Crown corporations, the bank is required under the FAA to submit an annual corporate plan with operating and capital budgets. The annual corporate plan provides an opportunity for the bank and the government to align our strategic vision for the organization. While an initial plan was approved in July 2017, the next plan is expected to more fully set out the evolution of how the bank will operate, including working with my department and other federal departments on how a potential pipeline of projects will be identified and how the public interest will be determined prior to bank independently finalizing negotiations and executing projects. You will find my expectations for the next corporate plan in Annex B. Looking forward, the bank should be open and transparent with Canadians about its operations, investments, and decision-making process while respecting the confidentiality of commercially sensitive information obtained from counterparts as required under the Act. So they'll be as open and transparent as they can be, right? Rule of law, everyone. That means about the same thing, right? It's gonna absolutely be not transparent, right? It's gonna be as transparent as Trudeau's government, which is a joke. Back to the article, and I scroll down. Recruiting and developing the right talent in a competitive marketplace will be crucial to the bank's success. The bank has the flexibility to hire qualified employees with the commercial experience and professional skills needed to enable the bank to execute on its mandate. In doing so, the bank should take into consideration Canada's gender, linguistic, cultural, and regional diversity. If you can't read between the lines on that one, well, my goodness, it is a license for people to spend a lot of money. Look at the Ontario electricity board and the people who were at the head of that, and the CEO of the hydro, et cetera, all of that scandal. That's a license. That's what this says. Please do that. Please do that. You need to recruit the best and make sure it's a diverse best, which is in itself discriminatory. Get the best, and you can get very, very good people without having to spend millions of dollars, really, like on yearly compensation plus dividends and the pension, etc. The pension is instead, right? Like, anyway, I don't want to get off topic. Back to the article here. In developing the bank's innovative new model, the government drew extensively on international best practices and consultations with peer jurisdictions and international bodies. As other countries face the same challenges of closing the infrastructure gap with private and institutional capital and finding new ways to fund infrastructure, our global partners will be watching and learning from the bank. Two things I want to point out. One, do you want to be guinea pigs with this? Why don't we fund our infrastructure with our tax dollars? Isn't this innovative? We don't need to invest. We have taxes for that. We have a whole system set up. It's called taxing. That's how we build things. Oh, right. But you think our taxes are to be sent out of Canada. Here, reporting it on July 3rd of this year, 2019, Canada will give Ukraine $45 million. And apparently it's to make sure their elections go smoothly. So why are we interfering in the Ukraine's elections? Why can't the Ukraine do their own elections? Give me a good reason. Russia? So you're saying that we should give Ukraine $45 million to combat Russia? Right. I don't think there's an argument for that. I really don't. For Canada to be interventionist in that way, I don't see the argument. Prove me wrong. I'm glad to hear it. Here's another $223 million. Trudeau government hands out $223 million to fight climate change in the Americas and the Caribbean. This was posted a week ago, and I tried to find like a CBC article on this, and I couldn't. The only other news article, there was Cap for Canada, there was Post Millennial, and well, there was the government's own news release about it, but other than that, there's not much. Here's the government's news release, June 28th, 2019. It says developing countries are disproportionately affected by climate change, with women and girls most often impacted. Again, I don't understand why women and girls and not women and children. Do little boys not count? Are little boys less or more resilient than women? How can you forget little boys? I don't understand. Women and children, that works. Women and girls? Oh, okay, I guess. Sure. Anyway, they get Canada. Maya Monsef announced that Canada will contribute $223.5 million to the Canadian Climate Fund. And I told you the other day that I thought it was probably just in 1 year, because this one on the same page gives the qualifier of $600,000 over 2 years. So in absence of further details of this spend, I think it's possibly upfront. I could be wrong. I don't know. So I find it interesting. How we don't have the money to fund our auditors. We don't have the money to develop our own infrastructure. We need to have an infrastructure bank that hires and attracts private investors. But we can send $45 million to the Ukraine, and we can spend $223 million in the Americas for climate change. And we don't know how to fund our infrastructure, guys. We can't do it. How did we build the Toronto subways again? How did we build the 401 and the Trans-Canada Highway? How did we build our infrastructure throughout the last century? Could you answer me that, guys? Why are we sending all of our money outside of Canada? Why are we consistently spending money outside of Canada? We're not moving the needle on quote-unquote climate change. China is creating a new Canada every 4 months, and I've heard as little as every 21 days, but I don't know, with regard to emissions. So what are we doing? It seems like we're making Canada broke while simultaneously shutting down Alberta's ability to make money off their natural resources, make oil revenue. So it seems like a bad idea to me. It seems like a terrible idea to me. It seems like we had a system that was working, and it seems like these Trudeau Liberals sound like they're doing a lot when they're actually doing a lot to undermine the ability of our country to take care of itself. It's really concerning. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca and have a wonderful, wonderful day.